I will now introduce to you our first presenter, and she's all the way from Canada. We wish you could be here, Marion, but hopefully we can see you in person another time. We look forward to your presentation, and I will ask you to please introduce yourself, and the presentation is yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, and I wish I could be with you as well. I thank you very much for allowing me to be present, even if only via Skype, and accommodating our very, very tight meeting schedule here at my own university. I am with the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada, and I'm a professor of tourism management in the School of Hospitality, Food and Tourism. So the presentation that I was asked to give is an approach that we have used successfully with one of our regions to very cost-effectively estimate their economic contribution to tourism. I'm going to just start by giving you a little bit of context so that you can understand the geography that we are dealing with. Up here in red, that is the province of Ontario within Canada. It is about twice the size of Sweden and probably 20% larger than Germany, just to give you a bit of a context. The province is so huge that about 5 years ago, as part of its strategic plan, the province decided to create regions, and the region that we are specifically dealing with is number 4 here in green, and it would be that tiny little dot on the map of Ontario. Well, this tiny little dot is well over half the size of Switzerland, or a third of the size of Denmark, but it has very, very few people in it. So that is sort of its challenge. It only has about 12,000 people living in that whole region. So let me give you also a bit of background on the Ontario Tourism Competitiveness Strategy, which, as I said, was released 5 years ago. And it called for strategic investment, not surprisingly, as well as maximizing the return on investment for the money that the government was investing in the tourism economy. It created these regions that we call RTOs, and specifically as one of the subcomponents of the strategy, called for monitoring and benchmarking progress against performance measurements. And the way the province saw this happening was through the Provincial Tourism Regional Economic Impact Model, fondly referred to as TRAIM. TRAIM, as you might recognize, has many issues with it. It is a standard economic impact model. It provides output at 4 levels. The lowest level is census divisions. These would be sort of county level. Then we have our metropolitan areas such as Toronto or Ottawa. The regions itself, which usually encompass about 4 or 5 counties, and then at the provincial level. And like all economic impact models, it produces direct, indirect, and induced impacts based on the input, the revenues, or the detailed spending. There's 2 options. It can also calculate this for investments. And then it produces the calculations of GDP, labor, income, and employment as an output, and provides the tax information for our 3 levels of government: federal, provincial, and municipal. The way this model is run, the data is sourced from 2 different surveys. Our travel survey of Canadian residents, which in and of itself is a subset of a mandatory labor force survey. So it is an incredibly long survey, as you might imagine. And there is also the second survey on international travel. So these 2 instruments are collected regularly by our National Statistics Office. The problem is that in both instances, spending information is very poor, and it is essentially reallocated based on where the visitor said that they went. Now, we all know that with rural regions, they often do not remember the names of towns that they went to, and so the larger communities are always overrepresented, and the imputation of trip expenditure for rural areas is particularly difficult. Since both of them are voluntary surveys, the response rate for the Residents of Canada survey is fairly decent because it's attached to the Labour Force survey. The international travel survey is very poor because it's a mail-in after you return from your trip, and the number of people that actually do that from outside the country is quite small. So we know that there is a distortion in values assigned to some of the regions, and particularly those that are somewhat more remote. Because of this, we, as you can see, we have these regions, and because of this, these regions were scratching their heads to say, how in the world are we going to work with TRAIM when they do not really represent our region? In a vast territory like the one that the province represents and that each of these RTOs represents, you have great diversity in the type of product. So RTO4, the region that we are talking about, for instance, is very, very well known for its Shakespearean festival. Its namesake city, Stratford, in Ontario, has built this festival that attracts about 800 to 900,000 visitors a year, about half of them coming from the United States. That is quite unique in Ontario, as you might imagine. The other feature that attracts quite a bit of visitation in this region is a small town called St. Jacobs and its farmers market, and you will see some pictures on the coming slides, as well as the Amish subculture that really built St. Jacobs. And they too are unique in the province, and with the growing interest in local foods and organic foods and these kind of products, this market sees very, very large visitor numbers. So there is a picture of the farmers market. You can see the old building, the old wooden building, and this would be a typical sort of Saturday morning. The market is now open 3 or 4 times a week for about 8 hours each day and is packed. So the objective of our study was to really challenge the accuracy of the final demand that the TRAIM model projects for our region, and to see if there would be a cost-effective way to calculate this demand from the ground up, and have numbers that we knew we could rely on more so than the ones that come from the top down from the national surveys. This, by the way, is a picture of one of the Amish, very typical with their horse and buggies. That's how you see them in the countryside. So again, very quaint, very different, and people love to come and just see this different lifestyle. Anyways, we have in Ontario for a number of the destinations a reservation system called Marion reservation system that has both e-marketing and online booking capabilities. It features everything from attractions, accommodations, events, golf courses, now restaurants. It's broadening out. The big advantage with Meridian is that very small businesses can actually afford to belong and use online reservations as part of it. And the metrics that the reservation system produces allows for some monitoring Obviously, it is largely for overnight accommodation, but we felt that that was a good start to probe further into what was happening in our region. So we used essentially 3 sources to triangulate the data. This, by the way, the picture is the Swan Parade in Stratford, Ontario, at the beginning of the summer, and in the fall they are housed indoors, and so move to and from the lake, and again, huge attraction for visitors. Anyways, the 3 sources include web traffic to the individual portals, because each of the counties in the region, as well as the Stratford Festival, as well as RTO4, each have their own web portal. So you could go to their landing page, and through that you would actually, if you wanted to book accommodation, end up on the same Meridian Reservations website. And we looked at all of these as well as the conversion to actual booking, and it is about 10% of visitors to all of these portals that do go and book. A vast majority, of course, are booking in the Stratford area because of the festival. Their average length of stay is about twice what it would be in the rest of the county due to the festival and people traveling there often for 2 nights. So the Meridian reservation system provides us with information on the number of nights sold by origin, so we know exactly where people come from. We also know how much they're spending per night on accommodation, and since we have the total number of visitors and the number of room nights sold, we also have party size and number of rooms sold. So all of that really allowed us to calculate out the proportions by origin, and we used that to weight the data ultimately. We then used a survey that was sent to anybody that had booked accommodation, and was sent to them 3 days after they left the accommodation, to really reduce the bias that is so often introduced with recollection, especially when it comes to spending. Our target was 200 surveys per segment, and we wanted Ontario, the rest of Canada, and foreign, including US and international, just because the international are a very small percentage. We also asked our participating operators in the reservation system to provide occupancy and revenue data at the end of the season, so we could see what share of their total room nights was actually sold through the Meridian system, since many of them have their own websites and sell through other online travel agents like hotels.com or Expedia. Unfortunately, as was feared, the response rate by operators was very low, in spite of the fact that RTO4 repeatedly pleaded with them to work with us. Operators are simply very reluctant to share any kind of information. So we turned to the Smith Travel Accommodation Report, the STAR report, which tracks accommodation and has a very strong database of roofed accommodation and can calculate really the region's share. Now, they produced their report for southwestern Ontario, which actually includes 3 other RTOs. But we know the room stock that we have, and so we applied the share of room stock to the overall and used that percentage to then also apply it to revenues and the spending that came out of that report. So finally, we had 805 surveys, which was a 24% response rate. Pretty amazing when you consider it is an online survey that required about 10 minutes of people's time to fill in the spending information. We were able to have almost 680 usable surveys that we were able to analyze. But we did have to regroup Ontario with the rest of Canada because rest of Canada was too small. And so we called this Canada, and then foreign, which was largely US, was the remainder. And as you can see, a third of the respondents came from outside of Canada, which is a very high percentage for a rural area. About 60% of the people that responded were women. Also not surprising when you consider the cultural aspect of the destination. And it was skewed to higher education, especially in the United States. They had very, very high percentage of graduate students, of graduates, university graduates as part of their sample. Again, it can be explained because of the theater and the level of education that you would expect from a theater-going crowd. Over 90% was travel, very, very little other reasons to stay overnight. And of course, the vast majority traveled by car. There is only a small airport in the largest city in the region, and it only has a few flights, only one international. So not many people would be flying to that airport. If anybody flies, they would be flying to the Toronto airport and then renting a car. So again, in the region, really car travel is the only thing. Some come by bus because of group travel, and that sort of would explain the remainder. There's a very high percentage of people who have prior experience with the region. They do come year after year to the festival theater, and they plan on returning. So again, it is not your typical visitation. Length of stay for Canada, as you can see, almost 1.5 nights. The US over 2 nights because of the longer distance that they have to travel. So what we did was, out of our survey data, we had detailed spending and were therefore able to calculate the percentages from the survey data. These are the percentage, the share of spending for the various categories as they appear in TRAIN. And we have the origins for each of our visitor groups, Canadians and US, and we are able to calculate their spending. We then took this spending and put it into TRAIN to see what the provincial model would have said based on the total spending in the region. And as you can see, accommodation was significantly underestimated by the TRAIN model, as was recreation and entertainment. Now, again, this is largely due to the theater tickets being fairly expensive and therefore not surprising. On the other hand, transportation is severely overestimated. And this is because even the flight information, the trips by air, would be imputed to regions and shouldn't be in the case of RTO4. The other area that is seriously overestimated is food and beverage. It's almost twice what it actually turns out to be. So just looking at some of this information, we found that these categories were really significantly different and skewed the picture that was being painted for the region. Now, we then took this information, and used our STAR report to say, okay, what is it showing us Well, first of all, we know that RTO4 has 83 hotels, motels, inns, roofed accommodation essentially, and they range from very small to the largest property at just over 200 rooms, and the total is not quite 6,000 rooms. But it represents just over 30% of the accommodation base in Southwest Ontario. And so when we looked at the revenues by month, we calculated the total revenue as 37 million. Again, if we input that into TRAME and use our shares to calculate the total, you see these are the same shares that we had from our survey. This is the accommodation spending we calculated with the STAR report. The others then fall out quite easily to give us a total of $148 million. And when we put that into TRAME, very similar to the original table I showed you, accommodation is underestimated, whereas transportation and food continues to be overestimated. Recreation and entertainment is underestimated, and other retail is overestimated. So the findings really confirm what we found based on the survey and just building it from the ground up based on the overnight accommodation of which we are very certain. So when we then look at all of these, our conclusions are really that the regions are very unique, and that with theater being the major attraction in RTO4, the higher than average spending on entertainment and accommodation as well is really not captured by the macro statistics. And things like local transport and food and beverage prices are probably much less in the rural regions than the urban centers, and therefore by just reallocating the expenditures across all regions in an identical fashion, you are overestimating what is happening in these rural areas. So therefore we said that really our current TRAME model does not adequately reflect the local realities, and we really have to find a much better way of getting at this information because each region is unique. Now, not every region has the Meridian reservation model, and therefore we will not be able to replicate this for all regions, but it will be replicated in those that do have the Meridian model, because we'll be able to send out surveys and determine the spending in their regions and where the differences occur. And with that, I would like to open it for questions. And as you can see, just very briefly, this is truly a shoestring budget, very affordable for these regions that have little money. It costs them $10,000 to develop everything, the survey that we sent out, the testing, the acquiring of data. And if it is, as RTO would like to do, repeated in 2 to 3 years, it would only cost them half that because the rest is already in place. And with that, I'd like to open it for questions.
Do we have questions for Marion? Don't be afraid to ask stupid questions. They are most likely the best questions, and most likely a question that everybody's considering. Yeah.
Hello?
Yes.
So it's difficult to see, or no, here. No.
The lady in the front row, Marion, is asking.
Oh, we're just trying to fix the camera. Yeah.
Yeah.
There.
Oh, there she is.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I was thinking about the day visits because there is a lot of focus on overnight stays. So how was the statistic handled?
We have not, and you're quite right. The whole visiting friends and relatives, which is very big in the region as well, and the excursionists have not been captured. We needed to make a start, and the province really is only interested in overnight stays. A lot of the strategies are being driven by hotels because they are paying a hotel tax for marketing purposes and are funding both the regional organizations and much of the provincial advertising, and therefore attention is focused on overnight stays. I totally agree that the overnight stays probably do not represent more than half of all the expenditures in the region, but at this point in time we have not found a cost-efficient way of actually capturing the day visits, simply because it would require on-site surveys or telephone surveys, and both of them would be very costly.
This is a very crucial question for us in Sweden as well. That's why yeah, I thought I will throw it away. Thank you.
Thank you. We had a question up there somewhere. Yeah, Marion.
Very interesting, Marion. One question for you. It seems like the existence of the booking system, Marion, was crucial to your study. Would you have been able to do this without a centralized booking system?
Not really, because what made it so affordable was the fact that we were able to send targeted surveys. We knew who had booked, for how long and how much they had spent. And that allowed us to, first of all, send out the surveys directly. They were automatically generated, so very cost efficient. And secondly, when the surveys came back and we saw the spending information, we could verify it against the money that they'd actually spent on accommodation. And unless they said that they also stayed somewhere else or stayed longer and did something else, we had the accommodation information. So we could see whether, you know, we were dealing with somebody that was just providing silly answers or not. We had to throw out a few surveys because of that. But it gave us that hook. And it really was the cost-effective way of determining the share of spending in each of the categories, because you have to get at it somehow. And if you're only dealing with OTAs, the online travel agencies, they will not do this for you.
They won't divulge the data, I assume. If you compare to different surveys that you've made, was the response rate higher here using the Meridian data?
Yes, we were very surprised at the high response rate, because 24% for an online survey is really exceptionally high. It's often no more than maybe 10%. So we were very pleased with the response rate.
I can imagine. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have more questions? Yeah, one here, Matthias.
Hello, Mario.
Hi, Matthias.
Thank
you for inviting me.
Of course, and thanks for this fantastic presentation. Just for specification, I'm not sure whether I understood correct your explanation. You said that you do a travel survey and an international travel survey for international tourists. Is
Correct.
that the ground and the main reason for the incapability of the macro level statistics, you called it, for the different divergence and differences in the results, or are there other reasons too?
No, it is the main reason. The two surveys that Statistics Canada administers really have major problems because every step of the way there is guessing. We know, for instance, if I just look at the International Travel Survey, we know how many people cross the border by car, which border crossing, by air, which airport. We know all of that, right? The pure statistics. So when they then receive the surveys back, imagine, just as an example, let's say 100% of the surveys come back from travelers that flew to Pearson. They will then turn around and say, oh, well, we know that 20% came through the Peace Bridge in Niagara Falls. So 20% of those surveys will be allocated to the Peace Bridge. Well, sorry, it doesn't work that way because passengers coming by air spend very, very differently, travel very different distances than the ones coming across the border by car. But that's what they do. So they have border crossings where they get no surveys and they simply impute from surveys that they've received from other border crossings to sort of spread it out and have something for everybody. And then they, of course, take that data and pull it together and say, oh, well, now it's your provincial data.
Mm-hmm. It sounds very plausible. Thanks.
Yeah.
Do we have other questions? Yes, at the top.
Hello, Marion. My name is Dennis Bedroff. I'm working for the Swedish Agency for Economic and Regional Growth. We're sitting here today, a number of Scandinavian people trying to understand how better quality data, better quality statistics, and better analysis can help us make more money to develop the Swedish tourism product better. Canada has for a long time been at the forefront on tourism statistics. People like Scott Mees at the CTC, the work of StatsCan during a number of years, your presentation today are all of very good quality. Do you see yourself how this actually reflects in a better Canadian tourism product?
I think this kind of information at the regional level will allow those regions to, first of all, defend their product better vis-a-vis the province and the Canadian Tourism Commission, because often the true understanding of what is happening at a local or regional level is not at the higher levels. And without good data, the regions are sort of brushed aside as not knowing, as not being the experts. The experts are sitting at the provincial and federal level. And that's just not true necessarily. You have some very capable people. It is just that they say, well, our region is different and the strategy you are pursuing simply does not fit our region. And when you have a region the size of this RTO4 that is incredibly culturally oriented, and you know, Canada and the province tend to promote the outdoor product and the adventure product, and well, that's not in this region. So they need to listen far more to some of those regions or allow the regions to truly do their own promotion in the market that they see key for them. As I said, RTO4 has a very high percentage of American visitors, much higher than most of the other regions. And yet the Canadian Tourism Commission has pulled out of the US market, although it may be going back in, but it had pulled out completely. And the province was focusing on markets in the United States, where regions like RTO4 were saying, but they're not our markets. Our markets are further west. Our markets are the Chicago market, for instance. And the province was going to abandon Chicago.
Dennis, is that okay? Or do you have a comment?
No, I was actually more after if you see any signs, actual signs, that good statistical, good analysis work actually improves the quality of the tourism products in Canada. You have been so good at statistics and analysis for a very long time. Do you really see that in the results as a tourist destination for Canada?
Well, it's a very tough question, because the product is individual businesses, individual attractions, accommodation. Even if they are chains, they remain individual. Whereas the statistics themselves are at a macro level. So I am not sure to what extent the individual operators actually worry about the quality of the statistics. But certainly at every level, the governments do. And the funding flows from those statistics. Now, I'm really, really sad to say that, and you may be aware of it, but our current federal government has severely cut the budget of Statistics Canada and has severely compromised the quality of both of our international and Canadian surveys. So what you had in the past will not be there going forward.
Okay, thank you very much.
We have time for another question. I think, Marion, I was curious about, because in your presentation in various instances you mentioned the difficulties of attaining data and response rates and quality of the data, etc. So what about the digital developments in tourism? I mean, we can actually, from digital data, know exactly where people are in every instance and basically what they do and how they feel and what they certainly purchase. So what do you see in the future in terms of the importance of this development coupled with the possibilities and opportunities of regional analysis?
Yes, a very, very strong possibility if you can get access to it. You know, whether it is credit card information or mobile technology, any of those that are out there, they are being held very close to the chest of whoever owns them. It may be senior governments that can get access to some of that data. I'm not sure that the regions will have the wherewithal, the financial wherewithal to do it.
Do we have comments or questions on this specific issue? Because it somehow also changes the situation in terms of data availability, and it becomes a problem of data security and data costs. Certainly it would be cost efficient, but there would be other types of costs involved. It's not about collecting the huge amounts of data available, it's rather who owns them and who has the rights to use them for what purpose. And therefore also other actors all of a sudden may be involved in the collecting and analysis of tourism-related statistics. So do you have any examples of anywhere globally that they have done developmental work in this area or tried out new ways of?
Well, some of the, and they tend to be consulting firms, such as Smith Travel and others like it, are working on what's referred to as big data and having access to that and trying to incorporate. I mean, even the fact that Smith Travel is able to produce revenues for hotels and roofed accommodation as extensively as they are able to is not something that regions would ever have the ability to do. Because, like I say, when the regions go to their partners, and they are partners, and explain what it is and why they want this information, and they were assured that the information would strictly go to the university and would not be shared in any way, shape, or form. It would only be made available in aggregate format. All of that in place. It's no, 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 no. And so it is the Smith Travels of the world that somehow, behind the scenes, are able to access that data.
It seems like an interesting development. Do we have one more final question or comment? Okay. Thank you very much, Marion, for giving us this interesting presentation, and we hope to see you in person at another venue in a different time. So good luck, and
Thank you very much. Yes.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.